Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Dr. Glenn is a clinical psychologist and former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leaving the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Before we get started, if you haven't downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, it's the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston with defeatyourcravings.com. And I am here with an encore interview with one of my favorite guests, James Miller from Lifeology. He's particularly good at making complex topics seem easy and concise and reasonable with very practical tips. If you're not subscribed to lifeology.com, I suggest you take a moment to do that now. James, how are you today?
I am doing very well. I had a great morning, and I am looking forward to this encore interview.
Let's do an encore interview, man.
That's it. That's right.
I remember last time we did a rough take of this, we were talking about something that really influenced my thinking since then, about how before you have a binge fantasy, before you have a set of thoughts that suggest there's a justification for reversing your previous best intents and breaking your rules or commitments, that there are some feelings in the body. I've done some research on that since then and learned that it has to do with the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is preparing us for action. And you were talking to me about, I think, either dry mouth or a little bit of perspiration or something. And what I found in working with people is that that actually does occur before the cognitive signal that you're about to break the rule. And so the benefit of that is that if you can intercept the urge sooner, it doesn't get a chance to develop and it's much easier to control. So use that as a lead in and maybe kind of let you recapitulate what you said, because I don't think we're going to use that old recording. So,
Okay, that's fine. To piggyback off that even more, from a personal standpoint, I'm able to recognize some of the symptoms I may have before any cravings that I may want. But even before that, I look at my environment as well. For example, today I'm not in studio, but I'm looking around my place. And as I look around, I can see disorder in my place from the previous night. And I think about last night and I think, oh, it was a lot of fun. But yet I think about the different aspects of how my environment influences me. And so my environment can often be the marker of how I'm feeling. So it's a good reflective tool rather. And so from there, if let's say last night was not good, and all of a sudden I realize, wow, my life may not be where I'd like it to be, or my night or whatever, or emotions are struggling, then I look back at how I'm feeling. And so it reflects my feelings. And if I'm realizing my feelings are causing me to feel a certain way, that might then prompt me to have these certain cravings. So it's important to perhaps go even further out and look at your environment, how your environment reflects you. And in that can affect your cravings as far as what's happening, which gives you more insight into the moment. And in the moment, you can then reflect on, well, wait a minute, if my house wasn't as tidy as I thought it was, let's say 3 days ago when I did binge or did have these cravings, let me walk myself back from my environment to the influence, and then from the influence into the actual binge.
Could you take me through the examples? Did you go back and clean up your environment?
Yes. So what I often do is come from like a heart coherence or heart math type of concept. Is your environment is reflexive of how you are in the life you want to live. And so if you use your five senses of how your life is, as far as my space looks a certain way, and I hear the certain types of music, use aromatherapy, that creates an environment for me that can be my baseline. And so as my baseline is there, if I walk out of that baseline, that means that I have the potential for cognitive thoughts, for cravings, or I might have some emotional struggles, which lead me back towards my cravings. So my environment often gives me great clues of where my life is. And so if my baseline is how I want it to be in my house, reflexively, that means my emotions are in a great place. So therefore, if I do have an intrusive thought that could lead me towards a binge, I'm able to be in my quote Zen moment, my Zen space, to help me refute that.
So taking care of your environment is really a center for you.
Yes, we all have beautiful places. I really love my place as well. And so for me, I know that order is what helps me refute any types of cravings I may have or any type of struggle I may have. So the order is represented in my environment.
Why is that, do you think? Because I think I find the same thing, but I grew up very differently. I was not a tidy kid. I used to have a sign on my wall that said, "A clean room is a sign of a sick mind." Um,
That's great. That's hysterical.
but as I recovered from overeating, first of all, I would find that the thing to do that would stop the binge, like if I had a binge that went on for a couple of days, if one day I got up and decided to clean up the house, particularly my car, if I like vacuumed everything and I got it all nice and neat, and I kind of understood that it's just signaling myself that I was an adult and I cared about myself and I was willing to engage in adulting, part of which meant that I was going to prepare my food and take care of myself and do some exercise and get healthy. But I never quite totally figured out the connection. Do you see it simply more there?
So going back to my environment, cleaning your car, whatever activity it is, when you stand up, that creates energy. So when we're often in a more of a mediocre state of mind, or we don't really have a lot of energy, if you will, to make a change, if you physically stand up, you are creating movement, which when you get movement, that creates a change in your perspective. So if I'm sitting on the couch and I stand up, I literally see the world in a different way. And that small reflex or that small movement creates the energy I need to put me in a different headspace to be able to do something for myself. So for me, as I'm putting my house back in order, or for you as you're cleaning your car, that's activity. And as we're working or walking or cleaning, we're allowing our mind to kind of reset. I'm sure you're very familiar with
Yeah.
EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a really good methodology that's used to help people who have trauma. But what you can kind of do on your own in a very layperson type of way, and how I do it per se, is when I walk, for example, I'm using my left side and my right side of my brain. And so what happens is it allows for me to process certain things as I'm going through my day or going through my activity. And I think about whatever it is. So if I'm struggling right now, or I realize I might be struggling, I process in my mind my emotions and the situation as I put things away. So as I put things away, it reflects or demonstrates me putting away that emotion, putting away that thought, and creating order. So it's almost symbolic of putting things back in the place where they're supposed to be. So for you cleaning your car, putting things back in the way it's supposed to be by vacuuming, you're removing that dirt or whatever it might be. So our brain mimics that. And so as we think of that, it allows for us to reset ourselves to whatever our tidiness level or whatever baseline we currently have.
You've given this some thought.
Well, good. I'm glad. I got it
Okay, so
right.
that's yet another signal. So every time I talk to you, I'll learn something else. That's yet another signal that we can have people attend to identify the trouble brewing, that there might be some trouble brewing. And then if trouble is brewing, you can engage in all the things that we talk about to relieve that organismic distress. Take a little nap, get some good nutrition, take a break, get out of the decision-making matrix, walk outside.
I have another technique that might be helpful. Sorry to interrupt you there. I always have my clients or myself create two scales for myself. Scales 1 to 10, meaning 10 is the best I feel and 1's the worst I feel. Create 4 or 5 different scales throughout the day. A person can determine the intervals of when they would do it. But when I wake up, I say on a scale of 1 to 10, James, how are you feeling? What's your emotional state? So if I'm like, you know what, I am at an 8 this morning. Okay, I feel really good. I got some good rest. I'm in an emotional, healthy state of mind for myself. Use that scale for my physical body, my corporal body. I'll say, well, I'm at a 3. And so it makes sense for me to want to stay in bed because if I'm not feeling well, I physically can't do something, I will stay in bed. But if my emotions are at an 8, that doesn't mean I have to be in a negative mood or I can't engage in certain activities that bring me joy. Vice versa, or conversely, if I wake up and my mood is at a level 3, but my body's at a level 8, that means I can still physically do the things I need to do that day and be mindful of my mood. And there's certain techniques and activities I could do to augment my mood to help me reset myself. But what we don't realize is throughout the day, we have so many triggers that happen. So if I use my morning baseline scale, if I rescale myself or do that perhaps at noon and I realize that my emotional state is higher, that's wonderful. That's great. I'm glad that things have changed. But if let's say in the morning my emotional scale was higher and then in the afternoon it was lower, well then what happened, James? What happened for you that you're struggling? And so when I use those markers to kind of interrupt my day, it helps me realize that life will continually influence me, but I determine how long I hold on to that for. And so if I hold on to something a little bit longer, then I will ask myself, let me review my physical state. Do I have that shortness of breath? Do I have certain attributes that I know lead me towards an urge or a binge? And if I do, I'm able to catch it before perhaps I engage in that binge, perhaps that evening. So it's another good way to purposely check in with yourself to determine where you are. And then as you rate your body and review any types of symptoms or signals you may have, it allows you to then catch it before anything could potentially happen.
Very interesting. What are the techniques that you use to augment your mood if you find that your mood is too low?
Some of the techniques I use to help me reset my mood is I will often use gratitude. And I know we hear that a lot. It's like, oh, gratitude, I'm grateful for this, or I have a list for that. And that is wonderful. I think everyone should start there. But what people don't realize is that gratitude, it's a full embodiment situation or activity. When I think of gratitude, I want to create as much dopamine as possible. So how I do that, and studies have linked meditation with an increase in dopamine, but I do it a slightly different way. So if I think about an event that brought me a lot of joy, if I think about that and I close my eyes and I give myself maybe 3 to 4 minutes of thinking about it, what I try and do is I try and embody that or relive that moment by using all of my five senses. So that means as I'm thinking of the event, I close my eyes and in my mind's eye, I see everything that's happening around me. If I either see it as a snapshot of the memory or I see the memory play out, I will look around in my mind's eye and say, what did I see? And I try and be as precise as possible, try and pick up as many nuances as possible. And then I'll say, what did I smell? And try and recreate what the sense of smell was. What did I taste? What did I feel? When I use all my five senses and really experience that, it allows for me to viscerally reimagine that. So then in that moment, I'm able to recreate that, feel all my five senses as if I'm in that moment. And in doing so, since that memory brought you so much joy, you're reliving that event to such a degree that you are flooded with dopamine. And that gives you a true sense of dopamine, whereas a thought of something, yeah, it can trigger dopamine, but when you fully embody it in a meditative state, it gives you a slew of dopamine that you would not be able to get should you just randomly think about it or write it down. So it's a visceral experience.
So it's not just that I am really grateful that my cat was in a cuddly mood this morning, but that he nuzzled his fur against my face and I could feel the angelic hairs against my cheeks, that I could smell his super clean cat breath, and he keeps himself really clean. My cat's very fastidious. He's really cute, but very annoying too. And that he turned on his purr machine so I could hear that soothing noise for the last hour or so of my morning before I got up. It's really trying to paint a picture in all five senses to bring that moment back to life.
Correct. So you can either do it that way in a narrative form that you just said, which I think is fantastic. Many people can do that probably more easily than more of a creative state or creative reimagining rather. So I'm thinking more about the imagery aspect of it, which would be go more towards my sense of sight, which is interesting. And you're using more towards your narrative component, which is your sense of hearing, which is also interesting.
Right. I'm an auditory kinesthetic.
Yeah. Okay. Whatever format of learning you have, I think is perfect. And so I do it more of the visual aspect of it, and you do it more of the auditory aspects, which I think is wonderful. So anyone listening now, choose whatever makes sense for you. Glenn, even hearing about your little cat, I'm like, oh, it must have been wonderful. So, I mean, for me, I enjoyed it as well. So whomever tries this technique, be as descriptive as possible, either in your mind's eye or as you write it out or speak it aloud. And that is how you'll truly experience the gratitude you have, as opposed to a few seconds of writing something down or thinking through something as well. Research states that for every negative thing that happens, it takes 6 positive things on average to counteract that. So if the world around us is negative all the time, to use these types of strategies for the gratitude that offsets that 1-to-6 ratio, because you can fully embody it more so than allowing the negative things to impact you.
There's something that I borrowed from a psychological technique to help people take that even further. What you're describing is a moment in time. It's like someone came by and took a picture and you got the visuals. For me, I have the auditory, narrative part, but it's a moment in time. There's a test in psychology where they show people a picture and they ask what the person was thinking, feeling, and doing before, during, and after the picture. They'll tell you that this is a picture that tells a story, and in a story we know something about what the characters are thinking, feeling, and doing, and we know what happens before, during, and after. And that set of instructions can really charge up your imagination and get you to not only experience that moment, but experience what happened just before, during, and after. And it kind of burns it into your brain a little more strongly and thoroughly. Let's see if I can do it for the cat right now. Well, before the cat woke me up with this purring, I was sleeping, but I was having a nice dream and he woke me up kind of gently, so that was okay. I actually dreamt that there's this 94-year-old woman in the building who thinks I'm her son. She doesn't really think I'm her son, but she treats me like her son. I actually dreamt that she gave me a haircut and she made a man bun, which would be ridiculous on me. It would look ridiculous on me. But I was cracking up and thinking, okay, I could live with it. That's not so bad. She's a sweet lady. I'll do it. And that's when the cat woke me up. And then right after, I just laid there and enjoyed it for a while. It was that morning kind of hypnagogic state where you're not quite awake and not quite asleep. Okay, so we're talking about an intervention to change your mood and flood your mind with dopamine when the urges are starting to develop. You're becoming more aware of the urges, maybe because of the disorder in your environment or any other reason that you can intervene in this way with gratefulness, but it's a more hearty gratefulness, if I can coin a term.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Last, I guess, episode that we did, I talked about my morning rituals, and that seemed like that was something you were interested in, how I start my day.
Please. Oh, yes. I can talk about mine too, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. This is your show. I don't
No,
want
no,
to take
no.
over.
Better for you. Better for you.
What I do, I always tell people that how you start your day is indicative of how your day is going to go. If I start my day rushed or don't take time for myself or engage in my morning rituals, then my first meeting or my first interaction with someone is going to be rushed. I may not be as present or as communicative or as thoughtful or have as much empathy as I'd like to have because I didn't start my day in the way that is right for me. So once again, if those of you listening, I like to create rules, I like to create structure for myself. And so when I live in that structure, in those parameters, it allows for me to be able to control myself in my environment. So whatever my environment is, I can control myself based off of the parameters I've set for myself. And so when I leave my house, wherever I go, I feel more connected, more in control of what I can control. So when I start my morning, I wake up, I have my cup of coffee, I walk my dog. And while I do that, I have, since I do the radio, a list of all my goals that I have created in a recording. And I have a list of attributes and traits that I want to demonstrate throughout the day. And so for me, I listen to that. And so it's probably about a good 15, 20 minutes. Depends on which year it is, because every year I redo my goals and have my goals there. So every morning I hear it. And so as I listen to that, I hear what my goals are, my short-term goals, my long-term goals. I hear the attributes I'm going to demonstrate, how I'm going to overcome certain situations. And it really gives me a good pep talk. Now, I'm minimizing it in that respect, but for me, it's a wonderful opportunity for me to start my day with focus, with determination, with drive, with hope, with everything that I can bring to the table. So therefore, that's the first thing I hear. And that's the first thing I experience. That's the first thing I enjoy. So as I'm walking my dog, once again, I'm looking around, which is also called a mindful walk, which means I use my five senses as well. I watch my dog as he walks. I listen to the birds around me. So as I hear all that, that becomes how I want my morning to be based off of what I can control. I can control what I listen to. I can control what I do in that moment. And that allows for me to find the agency and be emboldened to then tackle whatever situation or life may have. And as well, I use those scales too that we talked about earlier.
Would it be too personal to ask you to share a little more detail about what's in that recording?
Sure. So the first thing I listen to is my goals. So I have my more long-term goals and then my yearly goals, and then I have my short-term goals. For some of those goals, one of them is going to I have a couple things in the works right now on my personal note, but I have a TV show that I'm working on. And so for me, it's looking at funding for certain things. And so I'm really believing for some of this funding to come through. And so that's one of the things I focus on, the specific aspects of that. So call it the law of attraction, call it whatever you will, but it allows for me to put myself in a position where I can be as mindful as possible about how to accomplish that goal. When it comes to my personal goals, there's certain relationship things I'd like to have happen. So I talk about that. I focus on that. And in that puts me in more exciting mood to be able to walk towards that goal as well. When it comes to my friendships, I talk about how I'm kind, loving, loyal, gentle, all the attributes I can think of that demonstrate who and reflect who I want to be when I'm hanging around with friends or meeting new people. I talk about how my health and wholeness, how will be reset. And there's a lot of things that I believe in my life, my personal life, that will come true. And so it's not necessarily a wish list, because a wish is great, but without a plan, it's just simply a wish or simply a dream. And so for me, it's more about what do I do? What are the actionable steps I take? And so as I talk about these goals in my mind, or excuse me, as I listen to them, I talk about the actionable steps I will take to do that. I will be more cognizant when I talk to this particular person about this particular thing. There are certain things I do have in there that are very descriptive like that, because there are certain elements that I really want to hone in on in my personal life. So I will be really specific in that recording. Now, anyone listening to this can do anything they want. They don't have to record it, of course. If they have a list of things, or they want to write out about their goals, they want to write about their personality, want to write out about their health, about their finances, about their spirituality, whatever it might be. But the more intention you put behind it, and the more you read it, and I would recommend you use as many of your senses as possible as you read it. For example, if you read it, you're using your sense of sight, but if you read it aloud, you're now using two of your senses, your sense of sight, your sense of hearing. hearing. If you're actually walking when you read it, you're now using 3 senses: your sense of touch, your sense of sight, your sense of hearing. So the more senses you use when you want to make a change, the more it crystallizes in your brain and crystallizes in the moment, because now you're fully embodied in that, as opposed to being distracted by certain things and not really getting that, or listening and feeling what that is, viscerally feeling it. So that is really what I would suggest. And so, yes, I've hedged a little bit around some of mine because it is a little personal, but trying to give a little bit of insight and context into certain things of how that would kind of make sense for other people as well.
How often do you re-record it?
It depends on what it is. There are different segments in there. So I can re-record certain segments. So for my yearly goals, I will redo them every year. Now, if one of them hasn't been met, then I'll keep that particular goal in there. My more long-term goals, that stays in there as well. So I look at my 5-year plan, if you will, my 1 year, and then the smaller markers of, the next quarters. And if I do meet those quarter goals, then I will take those out as well and reset it with something else. Now, once again, I can do this because I'm on the radio for a living. It's easy for me to do these recordings. Nobody has to use recordings. They can just simply write it out if they choose, or if they choose to record it, then if they choose.
It's not so hard to make a recording these days. Just push the button on your
that's
iPhones.
Fair. Yeah. Oh, that's fair. Yeah. I didn't think about that. That's a good point. The other thing is, if you do record it, it's good to hear your voice, because when you hear yourself saying you will accomplish this, you will overcome this, it is probably one of the most empowering things, because you hear it, the excitement in your voice. You hear yourself on the other side of whatever that goal is, because in that moment when you write it, you're excited about it. You can see it, you can hear it, you can taste it. And so to have yourself be your own encourager, that is probably one of the biggest gifts you can give yourself.
And you're saying, hey, I know this guy.
Yeah, I can trust him.
I've actually have coaches that I've trained. One coach in particular, she developed a technique where she recorded a coaching session for herself. Like, for the moment that she had an urge, she set it up so that she had a video on YouTube. She could always go to it and watch her telling her what she's feeling. She understands that every bone in her body is suggesting she should have the chocolate, but she's going to be giving up on this dream and that dream if she does that. And these are the ways that she's going to manage to control it. This is what she's going to do instead. And she says she finds herself to be the best coach that she could possibly be for herself. You do something like that and you say, hey, I know that guy, all right? I know that girl. Now, I periodically do that, but I have to say that falls out of my routine. I don't do it in the goal-oriented way that you do. For example, if I'm working on changing behavior, like recently I gave up drinking even decaffeinated coffee because I'm trying to keep my blood pressure below a medicatable level. I made a mistake with my blood pressure eating salt all these years. There are things that my inner food enemy will tell me to suggest that it's okay that I have the decaffeinated coffee. So I'll have a refutation that says, look, your veins and arteries respond to caffeine the same way that your muscles respond to lifting weights. They'll go a little harder and less flexible. That's why I have no added caffeine whatsoever, not even in decaf. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has to do that, but for me, it's kind of an essential thing to do to stay off the medication. So I'll do that, and I might have a series of things that my inner food enemy says and a series of refutations to talk me out of it. And then I will put some inspiring music underneath it. I also have something called the Big Why, which is not just what I want to do, but why I want to do it, because I really want to be free of cardiovascular risk. And I want to walk in the world as a tall, thin, healthy man who radiates a smiling presence and has a lot of energy and isn't worried about all these medical things. And I put some inspiring music about it, and I get really jazzed up about it for about a month until the behavior changes. And I guess what I should do is just pick the next behavior and rework that. But I have a ritual that I do before I eat, which has a lot of the same things in it, and I do that without fail. I find that I feel like I need to change the recording so frequently that it gets exhausting to do that, but it sounds like you don't feel like that.
No, I don't really. Well, I've done it for so many years now. It's routine for me in the sense of I know the process of how to do it. For anyone, the learning curve is how do I do it? That's going to be the most tedious aspect. One of the most difficult things is if you're trying to do something that's creative, but it's the setup. The setup is what can really take away from people's creativity. If it takes too much to learn how to edit something or can't remember how you did it, well, then as you try and figure that out, the energy that should have gone towards the recording is now in towards figuring out how to do it. So it's learning how to have everything prepared before you do it, and then you're able to put all your creativity in the event as opposed to it's being parsed out by that setup.
Do you know, as you're talking about this, I think I know what the problem is. I am obsessive about editing out all of the ums and uhs. That takes a long time. And because it's very personal stuff I'm recording, I don't want to give it to my editor to do that. It's not that expensive to give it to him, but because it's very personal stuff.
Yeah, it's personal.
Maybe I should. I've got a good relationship with my editor. Maybe I should just say, "Hey, could you edit this for me?" And Roger, will you do that and not make fun of me, please? He's going to listen to this one now. He's going to edit out all the
That's funny.
all the M's and N's. Okay. Okay, terrific.
That's
Terrific.
funny.
Was there anything else that I should have asked you that I didn't? Anything that you wanted to share or talk about? Or
I obviously come from the cognitive standpoint, which I think is great. Your methodologies are fantastic and flawless. I like the synergy between us as far as mine may be more mood or externally driven as far as having your space, for example, be reflexive how you feel and then do the work backwards. I think for the most part, I think that's pretty much it as far as I'm sure there's like 1,000 more things we can come up with, but I think for the most part, I think those are good techniques thus far.
okay, well, thank you so much, James. Is there anything you'd like to tell people about how to get a hold of you or learn more about you, or just send them off to lifeology.com? What do you say?
Sure. James Miller at lifeology.com is my website. I'm very active on Instagram, so at James Miller Lifeology. Just reach out to me there, or just simply listen to my radio show on any of your favorite podcasting platforms, or go to, once again, James Miller at lifeology.com, and you can see all the different radio stations I'm actually on. But thank you, Glenn. I really appreciate your time and allowing me to be a guest on your show today.
I appreciate you coming.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. If you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.